looking at, where's your most economic model to get into rural America, you are pretty much looking at WiMAX right now. There's really nothing else out there that's beyond slideware. LTE, sorry. So you can look at deploying your RAN. They said there was a standards meeting actually in this room a little bit earlier. There's no standard RAN. Well, you could look at that as glass is half full as well, because now if you've got an operating system right now that's operating some form of technology in that space, you can adapt that core. If you've got some kind of HA, some kind of authentication system, you can fit WiMAX in on top of that. It's not specifically, there are certain data rates you're going to have to take into account, and I think Kevin mentions some backhaul considerations that you have to take into account. But it's designed that way. It can pretty much fit into a lot of different shoes. And if you look at the end-to-end value proposition, you've got a product suite, whether it's Cisco, whether it's Redline, whether it's Airspan. There are a whole bunch of different types of sizes and shapes for WiMAX in the marketplace already. So you don't have to go in there with a macro base station if you just need to get coverage into 300 homes in a particular area. You could do that pretty effectively with one or two sites and reduce the actual total cost of ownership on that particular deployment versus trying to deploy it like you would down in downtown Boston. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Cisco's investment, because as I travel all over the place, all over the world, I find that not a lot of folks know a lot about what Cisco has invested in relative to WiMAX and the technology. About 2 years ago, we acquired a company called Navini, which provided the radio access portion of the network. We've Ciscoized that per se, and now fleshed out the entire product suites within WiMAX so that we have the three options that I showed on the previous slide. We're part of the Open Patent Alliance as well. We've obviously been working very closely with the standards to get our Profile C ASN gateway up and running, and it's integrated very well with every other radio manufacturer out there. So we're pretty proud of it. I don't want to go into a full advertisement for Cisco, but we're pretty proud of the product that we have in WiMAX, and we'd like you all to know that we are here. And just the last point here, this is actually my last slide. Navini was actually the radio access device was the only thing that we bought from Navini Networks. Everything else has been at Cisco for a very long time. So we really just take it, look, everything from the connectivity services network behind that's all standard Cisco stuff, has been for 10 years. So for Cisco, it was really just about actually getting into the radio access network and buying Navini to get there. So if you want to figure out how to fit WiMAX on the edge of a network you've already got running, we can definitely help you. Thank you very much. Bob?
Okay. Well, I'll just dispense. That's quite all right. I'll take a page out of Qualcomm's book. I have some slides, but I'll dispense with those and maybe just talk about some observations on them.
You probably don't need the Cisco thing up there when you're...
Well, no, it's a great brand affiliation.
No, you leave that. John, come on.
Right. So I'm Declan Byrne. I'm Chief Marketing Officer with Airspan. We're a company out of Florida. We make WiMAX kit, both fixed and mobile. Been in business for 15 years. Traditionally, we've had a pretty strong presence in the rural markets in the U.S., generally with not wireless ISPs, but independent operating carriers, so the smaller rural local exchange guys. We were heavily involved, thank God for President Obama, heavily involved in stimulus in the last many, many months. We reoriented, as I'm sure my colleagues have, a lot of our sales and marketing effort to that. And an observation I would have, and I think it was one of you had actually submitted an application. Unfortunately, we found the process pretty hard, and we had hoped for it to be lighter and simpler. A lot of our current customers are Title II guys, so they know. That's a very, very heavy process and an unwelcome process. A lot of folks start Rust borrowing proceedings and then they just stop because it's too painful. My sense in the NOFA and this process was that it was pretty damn hard, and that was unfortunate. Having said that, I think there's a whole industry now that's cracked the code on the NOFA, and I really hope that they don't change materially the rules in round two. I don't and it goes both sides of the point. There's government reviewers now who've just figured it out too. So I would expect, as Kevin suggested, that they're going to lighten up a bit on what remote means. We couldn't, I was involved closely in about 25 applications, which valued about $500 million, of which Airspan Kit was about 120 million, 130 million. I don't think we could find a single remote community in our applications. Yeah. You'd literally need to be in a kind of an ex-urban suburb of Minot, North Dakota, and only be interested in serving like 30 subs or something. Any application of scale, my sense, you couldn't find anyone remote, which was so. I suspect they'll change that. I sat in this prior session on LTE versus WiMAX, and what a tired subject that is, and irrelevant really. But I think what's interesting, perhaps for this small audience, is as one contemplates rural broadband and stimulating rural broadband, it comes down, I guess, two issues. And probably the most important issue is: do you have an LTE frequency? And if you don't, well, then game over. I mean, there's Qualcomm sing all day about HSPA Plus and what a beautiful thing it is, but it's not an option for you. And most of the rural local exchange carriers don't have cellular frequencies. I mean, they've built their businesses over the last 75, 80 years delivering wirelines, cable, and they tend to use radio, WiMAX or pre-WiMAX to kind of creep into Quest or Embark on a kind of an opportunistic basis. And God bless them, they've done a great job. But they generally don't have PCS. I mean, we know who owns that, right? So, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, right? So I think generally that's what sort of makes that definitional sort of strategy for the operator. The other piece is on the economics, and even putting aside the cost of spectrum, mobility, LTE or HSPF suitable spectrum, the economics of WiMAX are pretty darn attractive once you get out of and this is really a euphemism for some of these towns I've been in recently, once you get out of the downtown core. Fiber is a fantastic solution, and I'm a radio guy, right? But if I had the money and there were 1,000 homes and businesses, I'd go fiber any day of the week. I mean, that's just got a beautiful long-term path. I can deliver video today with no issue. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But once you get out a little bit, your fiber trenches in at $24,000 a mile, and it's
Not
less
in Canada.
expensive. Is it more expensive in Canada because
You're
it's cold?
taking rock.
You're cold.
Oh, granted, right?
Right? You take a look at these rural markets, and
Yeah.
most of the studies we did were up at 100,000.
Well, this is in
Oh, yeah,
South
you're
Dakota.
sitting in
I was very familiar with a large, and I want to talk a bit about that, a 33 county application in South Dakota, and it's an incumbent operator, small, well, they have 50,000 subs, local exchange carrier, and they do cable and wireline, and been around for 70 years, and they actually have 700 megahertz in South Dakota, and they looked at the economics of going on a greenfield HSPA Plus type deployment or a WiMAX, and WiMAX. We talk all day about CPEs being $200, $300, $150, whatever it might be for an indoor versus an outdoor, and the base station anywhere between 6 and 12K a sector if you're going fixed or mobile. I mean, we're all pretty close to that, I suspect, right? And we differentiate on the margins and all that. The all-in cost in this South Dakota deployment was $1,350 per install sub. And that's everything. I mean, and that was greenfield towers, concrete pads, HVAC, CPGA costs, marketing. And so I don't know what it would have been on cellular, but if you had the spectrum, 0.01, which is a big if, it would have been dramatically higher than that. We know that because the operator told us that. And so on normal ARPUs of $30 to $40 a month for a 1 meg, 2 meg downstream service, that's a pretty good business case. And that's a loaded cost, $1,350. So, and my contribution to that as a base station device seller is 30%. So most of it actually comes from other stuff. So, Robert, you'd asked the question about will broadband succeed in rural markets just because of the stimulus? There's always, in my estimation, there's always been some rural success with WiMAX or pre-WiMAX. Folks out there who, whether they're RLX or WISPs who are entrepreneurial, kind of roll up their sleeves, borrow a little money, friends, family, whatever, and they go build a little network and they scale it slowly. That capacity to borrow even modest amount of capital in the last couple of years just evaporated. And so a lot of my operator customers in the but-for question, in the NOFA response, the question was, I just can't go to GE Capital. And even if I've got a beautiful business case and borrow it on any terms, $5 million, $20 million for a deployment in Nebraska. Maybe I could 5 years ago, but I can't today, and I don't think I'll be able to in the next 2-3 years. So it was kind of an easy question to answer in that regard. On mobility, interestingly, a lot of my customers went the mobility route, on 365 even. And the reason why mobility brings cost to the network, tremendous cost actually, and the whole core piece, which Cisco provides a lot of great products for, and the base stations being more sophisticated are generally more expensive. My sense is mobility is maybe even double your cost, kind of on a network basis, right?
Yeah.
But these operators found tremendous advantage to the value proposition, principally around first responder networks, right? So these 33 counties, for example, in South Dakota, that are putting in about 670 sectors of my WiMAX technology. And that covered for them 72% of the households and the vast majority of the soil in these 33 counties. They then go to ambulance, fire, police, what have you, with a tremendous value proposition that, you go with a slightly modified CPE, and Mr. Policeman, wherever you are in half of South Dakota, you've got a broadband link. So you need a mobile solution for that, and so a little contrarian, I suppose, but a lot of our customers kind of went the mobile route. They also did another interesting thing, which, if there are operators in the room, I might counsel you to think about. No radio is, like West Virginia, no radio technology is going to cover, you get this diminishing returns thing, right, where to cover the last 15% of the subs cost you 6 times the network cost. So they went a hybrid VSAT WiMAX solution, and they did as optimized a design as they could to cover X%, generally 75, 80% of the households and businesses in a county. But they also wanted to strengthen their application. They wanted to tell the government, you know what, as an operator, if you give me money, I'm going to guarantee that 100% of the residents in this county can come to me and get broadband. So the other way to do that, the infill solution, was I'm going to give them a VSAT solution, which will give them a meg down, 6 out, so it meets these kind of crappy broadband definitions in the NOFA. But I think it's politically, that's a very powerful proposition. But also as an operator, I think that's an attractive selling paradigm. Anyone who calls you, they're going to have some coverage or another. The other comment, you made a comment that some operators are going to be going WiMAX as kind of a lead-in technology, right, and then come after with fiber. I wonder about that. I mean, you go to these rural networks, and we focused on this because part of the stimulus bit was you've got to depreciate the networks, and it's 3 years, you get a grace period of 3 years, and then you've got to develop some kind of depreciation schedule. And I don't know how fast these networks are going to depreciate. I mean, this is like a gold rush and a perfect storm. I mean, there's an opportunity for rural operators to do something now, and I just don't know when they're going to revisit these networks. If they're putting in multiple megabits into rural locales, unless
it comes through for middle mile,
A lot of the middle mile.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah,
and it could be specific enterprises, or some early service deployments just to be in the community and then follow up.
Yeah, I can see that.
Not for a whole, mobile deployment or something.
Right. So that's sort of the comments I wanted to make.
Just to dovetail on one of your comments about some of your customers going mobile, I think a lot of the customers out there are pretty savvy about fixed WiMAX and mobile WiMAX, right, and they see that the entire ecosystem is moving to mobility.
Yeah.
And if you talk about the CPE cost at $200, I mean, if you're going to get to a $60 CPE, you're going to have huge economies of scale to get you there.
Yeah.
And so most of the folks that we're talking to, even though they initially considered doing fixed WiMAX, easier to plan, easier to operate, and cheaper to operate as well, they ended up choosing mobility because not about, hey, it's sexier. It's, in 3 years, how am I going to get a CPE?
Right. Well, not to mention the embedded devices revolution that's coming with smartphones and laptops. Most of the guys, and these are very sophisticated operators, these smaller local exchange carriers, they've been in business for a long time, and there's a reason. I mean, they survive, and they know how to compete. And they see, my sense is they see the 3G guys slowly but surely coming into their spaces. And so Yeah, I think they want to go.
Yeah.
And Navini, Cisco is to be saluted. I think you guys were one of the first with a really kind of optimized mobile indoor device. Led the industry.
Okay, well, thank you all. I think you guys have laid out a lot of issues. First, I'll throw it over to the audience if anybody has any questions. Let me go right here.
I've got one, actually. I've got a client that's asking me about a rural application. I actually called Redline. I've got some connections with some of those guys with DOD and DHS markets. And Dave Ramore said, call Clearwire. I said, okay. So I called Clearwire, and I called Clearwire, and I called Clearwire, and got the runaround, and ultimately they never got back to me. And all I was asking about was a business case where a Kansas newspaper company is looking to fund some infrastructure so that they're ahead of the CPE game, and so that when those clients get those embedded products or they get the, the air card or whatever, that they'll be able to do that in a mobile environment, and they'd be able to own the advertisements. And they've got money and they're ready to go. I would just ask what your guidance or thoughts are on that kind of business.
Who wants to go?
Like I said, I've called Clearwire.
Do they have Spectrum? The reason why you haven't got the answer, the reason Dave said call Clearwire, in the U.S., if you're going to get a laptop, it's going to come with 2.5 gigahertz WiMAX embedded. And the Spectrum owner in the vast majority of the United States is Clearwire.
Yeah, but if they were to go unlicensed?
If they were going unlicensed, they wouldn't have embedded cards within the laptops.
Well, and keep in mind, Clearwire has 55 megahertz at a maximum, given the nature of what the FCC ruled relative to their merger between Zone and Clearwire. So they were able to keep at a cap 55 megahertz. There's over 210 megahertz in the EBS-BRS spectrum band. There's spectrum out there. You just got to find it. So the original deployment of the spectrum was for land-grant universities back in the 60s or late 60s. And so a lot of the universities actually have that spectrum still, or they've maintained 10%. Even if they've leased, effectively sublet, that spectrum to Clearwire, they still have some spectrum. So Cisco, what we've effectively done is we've brokered deals between Clearwire and other spectrum holders for municipalities, colleges, and operators, ILECs and WISP, that want to do business in licensed spectrum. So it's out there. You got to find it. It does require a little bit of mining, so to speak, but it is there. It's there because there's plenty of other spectrum within EBS and BRS.
How would you, with that spectrum, how would you tackle the CPE?
I'm sorry?
How would you tackle with that other spectrum, the university spectrum, how would you still tackle the CPE challenge? Just wait?
Oh, it's the same. It's the same CPE. It's 2.5. So the laptops will come with 2.5 spectrum. The CPEs are 2.5. It's in the same ecosystem. And in addition, there's also there's 2.3 spectrum that's out there as well that should at some point turn into mobile spectrum as well, which is 20 megahertz of spectrum in 2.3.
If XM ever turns down their transmitter.
Well, the C and D are not really usable, but A and B is 10 megahertz each, so we consider 20 megahertz a usable spectrum and 2.3, and that's the same CPE that you would have as well.
Right.
So there's spectrum out there.
On the stimulus funding in WiMAX, how much have y'all seen in the rural areas where you've got law enforcement wanting to move off of data cards, which are expensive to get the CGIS information, criminal history information, sort of combining up with smaller LECs and WISPs that are out there to submit grants? And did that happen?
Yeah, we saw a lot of that actually. And what surprised me, and it shouldn't have, law enforcement has had access to 4.9 for a long time, I suppose. There haven't been a ton of products in that. We have products, but the reality is that it's really crappy spectrum. You need a ton of base stations to serve law enforcement well in their frequency. And so with operator customers, we proposed 365 lightly licensed to police forces in rural America. And they were, our thought was they're not going to want to go for it because they want protected spectrum and blah, blah, blah. But it propagates pretty, reasonably well. It's available. The operator's going to, run it and make sure it's, clear and usable. And there's a whole paradigm in the FCC to make sure that you work it out if someone comes in behind you with 365. We have a vehicle-mounted CPE with a low-profile mount antenna, mobile. So, it's a solution that's it's about $500-600 a CPE. It's more than a domestic device, a consumer device, because it's got a lot of extra mounting. But it's available. It's proven in. It's FCC RUS certified. So we found a lot of interest and operators wanting to do that. I mean, generally these guys have a long history, as I mentioned, of working with colleges and police forces and all of that. So, yeah, I see a lot of that and more.
Any other questions? Well, let me just go back. When you were talking about that, the model you were talking about in the rural community, responding to my question, what were you talking in terms of population, in terms of densities?
Question to me? Yeah. These are pretty rural counties. In Nebraska, we did some counties, large areas, population 1,800. And so, what's good though is you go into rural America. Trying to get a tower in Vermont or Manhattan, I mean, it'd take you years and whatever, right? We actually found, and forgive me if any of you are from very, very rural America. Don't take this the wrong way, but the joke was that putting a tower in somebody's backyard improves the property value. So getting a tower was really a quick process, and you get a really big tower generally. So actually doesn't take a whole lot of sticks to cover a lot of land. And it's middle America's, unless you, I guess, go to Colorado or something, pretty flat.
Right.
So it's a beautiful radio propagation environment. We did 12 counties in Nebraska, and it was about 300 sectors, maybe 120 towers, to give you an idea. And that covered something like 400,000 folks. Business plan assumed a 10 to 20% penetration rate over 5 years. Wow. The Lex can get that. They're a known brand. They've got multimedia a lot of stuff they offer. People hate Quest generally, right? Are the ILEC. So.
Well, and I think you mentioned it, John, in your presentation that it's a local company.
Yeah.
And so they're going to somebody that they'll look in their, they'll see at the coffee shop.
Right.
So there's a heightened level of, service availability that these, local operators take into the market. So, we partner with a lot of these guys and said, we just want to enable you to help you do that. So.
Typically, we found our rural operators are getting 25 to 30% penetration.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're getting huge penetration rates very quickly. They belong to the Lions Club. They belong, right.
But who are they? I mean, are they the incumbent? They're not the incumbent.
They're not the incumbent.
No.
Well, they may be the rural IOC, right? The independent phone company,
right?
Or they're a wireless ISP.
Totally separate business.
A lot of them are just separate wireless ISPs. Guys who had a dream. In 1996, 97, 98, they decided a lot of these guys, at least in the Mississippi Valley, these guys have been in business now 10 years.
Doing Wi-Fi.
Doing proprietary, for the most part, wireless access. And now they're looking at this next step.
But it's an amazing phenomenon. I don't know why it is in the U.S., but among wireline Lex, we've got a lot of them. I mean, more than like any other country I've seen. And I've traveled a good bit. In Iowa alone, I guess there's over 130 wireline local exchange carriers. And maybe it's because we have this tremendously rural population in the U.S.
Well, actually,
far more than we have in Canada, though.
Yeah?
We have 100 independent phone companies in all of Canada.
Okay, so one state in the U.S. has got more than all of Canada. Yeah.
Well, the history of that, because I actually know that, is that in the early part of the century, when AT&T first started, they actually sold the patent rights on a geographic basis. So they would go through a town, because I'd represented a bunch of these in the Midwest. They'd go through a town and they would sell it to some local, businessman. Like one of the ones I worked in, he was the dentist. And they bought it in the early 20th century, and 75 years later, they had 70,000 access lines, and that was their business. So if you go back, they all tend to be the one I worked with one in Lincoln, Nebraska, and which later got bought. But it was a family that bought those rights many years ago. So, and outside the U.S., most telephones was really state controlled and state operated.
Branch of the post office.
So there wasn't even an opportunity for independence.
Okay. And there tends to be, I think, in North America, more of an entrepreneurial spirit. So even internationally, you don't see the wireless ISPs popping up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, with the exception of perhaps Africa. Right. I mean, if I look at all the travels I have, Africa is probably the continent that's most like North America in terms of this entrepreneurial spirit of, go up and get there. And maybe it's because, you look at emerging markets, right? 7% of the population of emerging markets live within the reach of copper. So all of a sudden, if you've got that small a penetration of something that everybody is associated with, you start to do other things, right? Whereas, you look here in North America, we're looking at 95 to 97% penetration by copper that's been put in over the last 85 years. Right? So completely apples and oranges kinds of markets.
Right. Although, of course, we have, federal policies that created the USF here in the United States, which actually have subsidized getting into those markets.
They also AT&T was blocked from when they were in their stage of purchasing up all the local phone companies. At one point, they were blocked from going any further. So a lot of those smaller ones might have eventually got purchased. But
and that raises just a whole other issue, which I think will percolate, is do we open up USF to subsidize?
I think that's I think we're at the beginning of a long-term, and maybe I'm a broadband equipment guy, so I hope this, right? I think we're at the beginning of a long-term investment into rural broadband. And Senator Kerry's staff council talks about making a requirement that USF be, required not only for voice but also for broadband. And I know a lot of the guys that are in USF territories that are leveraging USF thinking that way.
Well, it's a $7 billion pool of money.
That annual, it's an annuity. More importantly.
Yeah. Right. So you're right.
I think that's a good movement because, if you look at wireless in Western Europe and really around the world in Asia, it's a utility.
Yeah.
They look at it the same way as water and electricity. We really don't have the pleasure of being able to say, like, my wireless is down. Like you would say, my electricity is out. They look at it that way. It's a utility. And if we could get that mentality in the United States, I think we'd be far better off, and rural America would be addressed quite rapidly.
Yeah. We didn't talk much about Native American reservations, but we've had, I don't know if this is of interest to anyone here, but we've had some big projects, too, in the stimulus. And there is a population segment that I guess intuitively we all understand is woefully underserved. We've got a big project with the Navajo, and they're the largest, I guess, Native American tribe in America. It's only 140,000 members across 3 states. 20% telephony penetration.
Yeah, it's.
What's the dispersion like though in the communities? That's got to be the challenge. How do you deploy into that?
They're pretty freaking rural, and
1.5-hour drives between.
That was my experience.
But wireless is, I think, the only solution that
I think so.
And
probably,
then only
don't have to worry about the fiber coming in to push that one out.
Yeah, we see a lot in those kind of. You probably see the same thing. We see a lot of wireless backhaul.
Right.
Yeah.
To get there and then distribute in the smaller area. Right? So it's a wireless you fiber wherever you can get it into it. Remember, in a lot of these cases, the community doesn't allow fiber to traverse the reservation.
Right.
So you're coming into a gateway point, and then they're building their own network, or they're building their own fiber over time. Right? Which will take a lot of time, more than the 3 years we have in ERA.
It's nice, though, to be able to make money, and this is going to sound corny, but also to be able to kind of do a good thing. I feel like this is. I've been in this business now 10 years on the equipment side, and it's the first time that I've really seen a program which is pretty cool. You see lives being changed on a local basis, and we're making a bit of money out of it, and operators are growing, and all the tertiary job creation.
I think what underlines this whole policy is trying to build a sustainable economic model. And if you can bring that to people who have economic challenges, it is a good thing. And that's why I think the government is involved.
I wonder what's the more important thing from the government. Is it policy, like what you're talking about, or is it jobs? I
think, both. I think there's...
when you get to broadband, though.
I think it's both.
It's probably both. I would say it would be both, but I mean, I don't think you can avoid the fact that, the current administration was put in office by folks who are very familiar with the internet and very familiar with making contributions over the internet. And to the extent that you expand the internet to areas that didn't previously have that access, I think you get reelected. I mean,
so policy.
it's not altruistic.
issue,
I mean, I have the same sense because from a worldwide perspective, Cisco does country transformation. When we had the earthquake in China, we went in and we built all these hospitals and linked them. They only had one hospital, now they have 9. They're all linked on fiber. I mean, it felt great. John Chambers is very excited about being able to focus on the United States in a country transformation because he says it's totally necessary and totally needed. But we haven't had the means or the opportunity to really do it up to this point.
And when we go in and we talk to emerging markets, and let's consider rural America to be the same as an emerging market, by the 10% increase in internet penetration, there's lots of studies out there. 6.5 times impact in GDP.
Yep.
Right? I mean, so it's a huge. So the secondary impact is jobs and income and tax dollars and
Higher
things
educational levels. I mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah, well, I think this has been an interesting discussion. Just last chance for a question. Okay, well, thank you very much. I thought this was a good meeting. Thank you.